Welcome. Tonight we're not visiting the usual gods, Not Zeus, not Odin, not Ra. No, tonight we're wandering into the silent corners of forgotten temples, peeling back the dust of time to meet the ones whose names once echoed across mountains, carved into stone, worshipped by people who truly believed that thunder, love, and crop failure were personal messages from above. Now, they're gone, deleted by time like an embarrassing Facebook status. The gods who vanished from history. Before we start, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy it. No pressure. Leave a comment telling me which ancient god you'd want watching over your life. Personally, I'd pick one that handles parking spaces and Wi-Fi signals. Now, dim the lights. Sink into your bed. Feel the sheets wrap around you like warm sand in an ancient desert. Let your breathing slow. But before you drift too far, think about this. What would it feel like to live in a world where the gods really did walk among you? When people left offerings not for good karma, but because they were genuinely terrified of being turned into a tree. How would it feel to dedicate your life to a god, only for history to forget their name? Did their followers notice when prayers stopped being answered? Or when someone new came along and said, "Actually, your god's been replaced. We're doing new management now." And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in 2300 BCE. The air smells of clay, fire, and sweat. The stars above you don't have names yet, but someone will name them soon, probably after a god who will one day be forgotten. Let's meet them before they vanish. 1. The birth of the first forgotten god. Before there was Zeus, there was Dagon, half man, half fish, fully confusing. In the hot winds of Mesopotamia, people whispered his name for rain, harvest, and maybe luck with fishing. You, standing barefoot by the Euphrates, can almost hear those early prayers, rising like smoke from reeds and clay altars. The world feels young, unsteady, waiting to decide which gods will make the cut. Dagon was not born in lightning or blood, but in water, that endless shimmer between sky and sand. The rivers were everything to those first people, their roads, their drink, their mirror to the heavens. And so they looked into them long enough to find faces. Some saw a man with scales like bronze, others a creature whose eyes never blinked. They called him Dagon, Lord of the deep harvest, the one who taught humankind to plant when the tide receded. To them, he was wisdom itself, the silent teacher rising from the flood. But gods are fragile in their infancy. They depend on memory to exist, on whispers and retellings, and the steady rhythm of fear and hope. Dagon's temples once hummed with offerings, baskets of grain, salted fish, tiny clay idols dropped into the current to carry prayers downstream. Priests sang in low tones that match the rumble of the river, voices merging with the flow. Every ripple felt like breath from the divine. Yet somewhere along the centuries the current turned. Civilizations shift like sand underfoot. The Sumerians gave way to Akkadians, Akkadians to Babylonians, and each brought their own gods to dinner. Dagon's name faded from lips that once trembled with devotion. He was folded into other stories, sometimes as a rival, sometimes as a footnote, sometimes as a monster to be slain by heroes of a newer age. The gods that came after him were louder, flashier, more human. They had thunderbolts, golden thrones, and marketing departments. Dagon had only the quiet murmur of the tide. Imagine now an old fisherman centuries later casting his net into the same river. The water is lower, the reeds thicker, the air more crowded with human noise. He hums a tune that he doesn't remember learning. It's a prayer, though he wouldn't call it that. Just something his grandmother used to sing when storms rolled in. The words are lost, but Dagon is still there, hidden in the melody. Even forgotten gods live on in fragments, the way smoke lingers after the flame. In the cool of night, when the stars ripple on the river's surface, you could almost believe he rises again, the half-man, half-memory, returning for a breath, not to rule or punish, but simply to be remembered. The myths say that when a god is forgotten entirely, their last breath becomes a ripple, and that ripple becomes a dream in a sleeping mind somewhere far away. Perhaps you have dreamt of him without knowing, walking through endless water, feeling scales brush past your legs. And maybe that is the secret of the forgotten gods. They do not die as mortals do. They dissolve into our stories, hiding in the language, resurfacing when we need them most. Dagon, the teacher of tides, the fisherman's friend, the ghost in the current, waits beneath every flood and drought alike. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, the river carries you with it. The reeds whisper. The current hums his name once more, soft, patient, eternal. Dagon, the first forgotten god, dreaming beneath the stars of those who still remember. 2. The taste of clay and fire. You kneel beside a mud brick temple, pressing grain into clay as an offering. The air hums with flies and incense. Worship isn't elegant. It's sticky, smoky, desperate. You wonder if the gods prefer this earthy chaos to marble perfection. They probably do. The clay is warm from the sun, soft between your fingers. When you lift your hands, the dust clings, the same dust that built cities, that built gods. Every wall, every statue, every tablet began this way, earth mixed with sweat and shaped by faith. Somewhere nearby, a potter's wheel turns slowly, singing its circular song. A vessel is born, smooth and trembling, waiting to meet the fire. You realize that this is what creation has always been, the balance between hands and heat, between ruin and rebirth. The ancients believed that humans themselves were made from clay, baked by divine breath. Mesopotamian myths told of Enki, the trickster god of wisdom, molding people from mud to carry the burdens of the gods. The Egyptians had Khnum, shaping life on his potter's wheel from the red silt of the Nile. In each story, the act of forming clay was an act of rebellion and love. The gods could create stars, but it was the touch of the hand that made something truly alive. You press another handful of grain into the offering bowl. The scent of smoke thickens. A priest moves past you, robes brushing the ground, his face streaked with ash. He hums a hymn older than the city itself. The melody rises, slow and hypnotic, until the sound merges with the wind. For a moment, the air itself feels holy. Across the courtyard, a kiln roars. The flames pulse orange and gold, licking at the night. Pottery, idols, offerings, everything must pass through the fire to be made whole. Even the gods, it seems, are forged in heat. You can almost hear them crackle, reshaped with every prayer. It's no wonder so many ancient names have been lost. What survives the centuries isn't marble or bronze. It's the story, the warmth of hands that dared to shape meaning out of earth. There is beauty in imperfection here. Every crack in a pot, every thumbprint in the brick carries memory. The temple is not perfect, but it breathes. The people are not saints, but they kneel anyway. The gods are not flawless, but they listen. You begin to understand. Worship was never meant to be polished. It was meant to be honest. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbles. Rain is coming, rare, welcome, terrifying. The first drops strike the clay walls with a sound like applause. The earth drinks greedily. In that moment, everything connects. The fire that hardens, the rain that softens, the hands that shape. The cycle completes itself, creation and destruction, again and again, until the story outlasts the vessel. You stay there as the storm rolls over, watching the fire dim and the clay darken. When you rise, your knees are caked in mud. You don't brush it off. You've seen now that the dirt is sacred. Every grain holds the memory of someone who knelt here before you, whispering to the same silent sky. And when you leave, the wind carries your scent, clay, smoke, and ash, back toward the temple. It will cling to the walls for a while, then fade into the soil, feeding whatever grows next. Perhaps that is the quiet truth the ancients knew. We are all offerings, pressed into the earth, waiting for the fire. 3. The goddess who couldn't compete. Meet Namu, mother of the universe, creator of gods, mountains, and oceans. But like many mothers, she's soon forgotten once the children take over. You walk through her abandoned shrine, water dripping from a cracked ceiling, wondering how a goddess of creation ended up unemployed. Before the heavens had names, before the earth had shape, there was only her, a boundless sea of potential. Namu wasn't thunder or fire or love. She was the quiet, infinite before. From her depths rose the first gods, An and Kai, sky and earth, and from them came all others. She didn't need temples or songs back then. Her worship was the tide itself, the rhythm of existence. To breathe, to move, to dream. That was to live within her body. But creation is a thankless profession. Once the world stood firm, once rivers had beds and stars had paths, her children claimed the credit. They built cities, waged wars, carved their own names into clay tablets. They called themselves kings of heaven and earth, forgetting the mother who bore them in silence. Myths reshape themselves around power, louder gods, brighter gods, those who promised victory instead of origin. Namu faded, not because she was weak, but because she was too complete. No one worships the ocean once they've learned to drink from a well. You trace a finger along the cracked altar. The carvings are faint, waves, spirals, womb-like patterns. Once her priestesses would have filled this hall with chants that rose and fell like the sea. They would pour libations of water and oil, whispering prayers for fertility, for calm tides, for forgiveness. Now the only sound is the echo of dripping water, as if the goddess still weeps in her own house. It's strange how the divine mirrors the human. The story of Namu is the story of every mother who builds a world she will one day be erased from. She gave everything. Her body became the cosmos. Her voice became the law of nature. And then she was written out of the script. Her sons, Enki and Enlil, took her domain, inventing storms and wisdom, justice and floods. They needed drama. She had only serenity. And serenity never makes good politics. Outside, the wind smells of wet stone. You imagine Nemu not as a forgotten deity, but as the sea itself, unbothered by her obscurity. Perhaps she never wanted worship. Perhaps she wanted quiet. She's seen it all before, the rise and fall of gods like foam on her surface. Her power doesn't fade with neglect. it simply becomes invisible. The old texts say that when the gods grew arrogant, when their noise filled the world, Namu stirred once more. She sent dreams to the wise, visions of a flood that would cleanse arrogance from the earth, not as revenge, but as balance. The sea always reclaims what's built too close to shore. And when the waters receded, humanity began again, humbled and wet-footed, standing on the edge of her reflection. You close your eyes and listen. The dripping water is rhythmic, almost a heartbeat. It's as if she's still speaking, not in words but in patience. The lesson is clear. Everything begins with a mother's silence, and everything ends there too. The gods may rise and vanish, temples may crumble, but the sea remains, steady, endless, forgiving. When you leave the shrine, the air feels heavy with her presence. Every puddle ripples as though greeting you. Somewhere beneath the surface, Namu still dreams, unbothered by the centuries. She doesn't need devotion. She only needs time, and time, as ever, belongs to her. 4. When faith was a full-time job, every sunrise means another ritual. You grind barley, burn oils, whisper hymns in a language that's already slipping from memory. Forget the gym. You're too busy keeping the cosmos from collapsing by lighting candles correctly. Religion in the ancient world wasn't an occasional affair. It was maintenance. Every gesture, every meal, every sunrise was part of a divine contract. An agreement that said, if we keep doing our part, the universe won't fall apart. There were no weekends off from belief. Faith wasn't internal. It was practical, physical, exhausting. You didn't feel religion. You performed it. By midday, the city is humming with offerings. Smoke rises from temple courtyards in lazy ribbons. The scent of myrrh and burnt grain hangs heavy, mingling with the smell of sweat and sun-baked stone. A priest beats a drum slowly, keeping time for chants that have been repeated for so many centuries that even the gods must be bored of hearing them. And yet, the people continue, because to stop, even for a day, would be to risk everything. Drought, plague, silence from above. In Mesopotamia, they called this balance me, a divine order, a set of invisible rules that held everything in its proper place: stars, floods, kings, even dreams. To maintain the me was to serve the cosmos itself. It's not hard to see why devotion became obsession. The gods were powerful but temperamental, generous yet easily offended. You could feed them one day and be flattened by a sandstorm the next. Still, people kept building temples, kept singing the same hymns. The world ran on fear and faith, two sides of the same coin pressed into every heartbeat. You walk through the temple precinct at dusk when the heat finally begins to loosen its grip. The air buzzes with low voices, priests reciting invocations, mothers whispering names of sick children, farmers praying for predictable weather. Faith feels less like worship and more like negotiation. Offerings are laid out like contracts: bread, milk, a carved figurine. We give, you give, the people say. We keep the fires burning. You keep the sky from falling. It's transactional, yes, but also deeply human. Inside the temple, the walls gleam with oil and gold. Every inch is alive with symbols: eyes, hands, serpents, suns, reminders that someone is always watching. The priest lights the evening lamp, and shadows begin their slow dance across the stone floor. The flames flicker as if responding to the chants. For a brief moment you feel it, that impossible stillness, as though the air itself is listening. The irony is that most of these worshippers never saw their gods. They didn't expect to. The statues were intermediaries, physical vessels through which divine presence was believed to flow. When a god statue was cleaned or dressed, the ceremony was performed with trembling hands, not because of grandeur, but because the people believed they were caring for a living being. Faith wasn't abstract, it was intimate, like feeding an unseen guest who could destroy your world with a glance. As night deepens, the city quiets. Somewhere a lone voice continues chanting long after the others have gone home. The temple fires die down, the gods retreat to their silence, and the worshippers return to their homes to rest, if they can. Tomorrow will bring another round of offerings, another list of divine chores to check off. And maybe that's the strange comfort of it. The repetition, the order, the belief that your small actions matter in a universe too vast to comprehend. You fall asleep knowing that somewhere, someone else is lighting another candle, whispering another prayer, keeping the machinery of existence turning for one more day. In that rhythm, weary, fragrant, eternal, faith becomes not a choice, but a heartbeat. 5. The god who lost the sky. Once there was Anu, the sky itself, king of the heavens. Then his children took everything. You watch priests repaint his statue with brighter colors, trying to remind people he exists. It's like your company replacing your boss, but still using his photo in training videos. Anu was never a god of thunder or fire or vengeance. He didn't throw lightning or wage war. He was the canvas those stories were painted on, vast, unchanging, untouchable. In the beginning, that was enough. When the first cities rose from the mud of Mesopotamia, people looked up and saw permanence. The sky was proof of order, of something eternal watching over the chaos below. So they named him Anu, the father of the gods, the High One who set everything in motion. But eternity makes for a poor conversationalist. As human life grew louder and more complicated, people wanted gods who listened, gods who acted, gods who punished their enemies and blessed their harvests. Anu remained distant, his temples mostly silent, his priests left polishing statues of blue lapis and gold that no one came to see. His children, Enlil of the winds, Enki of the waters, Inanna of love and war, stepped forward, taking on his roles piece by piece, until the sky itself was little more than a ceiling. You can almost feel the shift walking through one of his temples now. Once these courtyards echoed with chants so ancient they barely sounded human. Deep drones meant to summon the presence of the infinite. Now dust gathers in the corners. A few priests linger, sweeping sand from the altars, murmuring to an absent god out of habit more than devotion. Their voices sound small under such a vast roof. In a way, Anu's decline mirrors that of the sky itself. When you stare up long enough, the heavens begin to look empty. Once they were alive with omens, eagles, storms, comets that carried meaning. Now they are still. The same expanse, but without conversation. Perhaps the people grew tired of waiting for a god who never answered, or perhaps Anu simply never needed to. His was a power that required nothing, no offerings, no flattery. He governed the fabric of existence itself. But humans don't worship fabrics, they worship faces. Some myths suggest that Anu wasn't angry when the others rose. He withdrew quietly, the way the sky does when night falls. He let his children argue, fall in love, betray one another, and remake the world again and again. He became the witness. distant, infinite, maybe even bored. The priests told themselves he still ruled, but in truth, he'd become a symbol, a signature on divine paperwork that no one bothered to read. You stand before his statue, freshly painted, yes, but the cracks show beneath. His eyes are wide, carved to watch everything but express nothing. A bowl of incense burns weakly at his feet, the smoke curling upward like an echo of prayer. The room smells of old stone and rain that hasn't fallen in years. There's a melancholy in the air, the weight of being forgotten but never gone. And yet, in that stillness, something endures. Every breath of wind across the plain, every glint of light on the river, still belongs to him. You realize that power doesn't always fade when worship does. Sometimes it simply retreats into the background, content to hold up the world without thanks. Anu's silence isn't defeat, it's detachment. The sky doesn't need belief to exist. As dusk settles, the last priest snuffs out the lamps, and the temple darkens. The blue paint on the statue glows faintly in the half-light, as though remembering the color of dawn. Outside, the horizon swallows the sun, and for a moment the whole world seems to pause beneath the invisible crown of the old god. Anu remains, unseen but everywhere, not as a king waiting for tribute, but as the quiet certainty that the sky will still be there when you wake. 6. The smell of forgotten temples. You step into a temple so old that bats are the only worshippers left. The scent of incense has become dust. Sunlight cuts through cracks in the roof like divine judgment. You whisper a name you barely remember, and it echoes back like the sigh of a dying god. The air tastes of age. It feels thick with memory, like breathing through the pages of a book no one has opened in 1,000 years. The walls, once covered in gold leaf and brilliant pigments, are now a dull mosaic of flaking plaster. Yet, even in ruin, something sacred lingers. The silence hums, not empty but heavy, as if waiting for someone to remember what it was built for. You walk deeper. The floor crunches beneath your feet, a mixture of sand, bat droppings, and the powdered remains of long-dead idols. On the far wall, a mural half survives, a procession of priests bearing torches toward a massive statue. The god's face is gone, eroded or stolen, leaving only a blank shape. You stare at it and realize how all gods eventually fade this way. Not destroyed, just weathered into anonymity. Once this temple would have been alive with light, fires flickering in polished bronze bowls, priests chanting in hypnotic rhythm, the smell of cedar smoke and honey, the sound of feet shuffling in reverence. Every day was a performance, a way to convince the universe that the world still mattered, and yet time, relentless and unmoved, swept through the doors anyway. A drop of water falls from the ceiling and lands on your wrist, startlingly cold. It's a reminder that nature doesn't care for memory. Vines creep through the cracks in the walls, coiling around the bases of crumbling pillars. The gods may sleep, but the earth never does. Each raindrop, each seed carried by the wind is reclaiming what once belonged to the divine. The temple smells of both decay and rebirth, of endings and beginnings, sharing the same breath. You light a small candle, though you don't know why. Perhaps it's instinct, that old human urge to trade light for safety. The flame trembles in the draught, illuminating carvings that have almost vanished. Wings, eyes, waves. These were once symbols of a god who ruled over both air and dream, a deity of whispers and vision, whose name was said only in the quiet hours before dawn. But no one remembers that name now. You almost feel guilty for standing here, for waking a silence that had learned to rest. As the candle flickers, the shadows seem to move. For a moment you imagine the temple alive again. You hear drums in the distance, smell new incense, see robes fluttering in ritual wind. You blink, and it's gone. Only dust and echoes remain. But maybe that's how belief works. Not in permanence, but in return. Every time someone remembers, even for a heartbeat, the god stirs. You sit on the cold stone floor, staring up at the fractured roof. The light filtering through looks almost divine, though you know it's just the sun doing what it always does, shining indifferently. Still, the thought comforts you. Maybe the gods were never meant to last forever. Maybe they were meant to be forgotten so that the world could learn to make its own light. When you finally stand to leave, you take one last breath of the air inside. It smells of dust, smoke, and something else, something faintly sweet like memory itself. You realize it's the scent of devotion long gone, still clinging to the stones. You step outside into the brightness, and for a fleeting second you could swear the temple exhales, relieved that someone finally remembered how to listen. 7. The Market of 1,000 Gods. Imagine living in a time where every city had its own divine mascot. One god for beer, one for door hinges, one for geese. You travel through the ancient bazaar of belief, where faith was just another thing you could barter. I'll trade you 2 blessings from Enlil for 1 rainstorm from Ninurta. The market is alive with noise. Bells ring from shrines, goats bleat in the distance, and the scent of roasted barley mixes with incense and sweat. Every stall is an altar, every merchant a priest. Wooden idols sit shoulder to shoulder on woven mats, some no bigger than your thumb, others towering like trees. One promises fortune, another protection, another safe childbirth. The air buzzes with prayers disguised as haggling. Try this one, a vendor insists, pressing a small clay figurine into your hand. He's new, brings luck with travel, and keeps snakes away. The idol is crude, sun-baked, and smiling. You wonder how many times this same promise has been made to desperate hands over the centuries. Faith here isn't about grandeur. It's about survival. Each god, no matter how small, is insurance against the unknown. Everywhere you look, belief is a commodity. One man sells charms shaped like ears, claiming they help the gods hear your prayers better. A woman sells vials of oil said to contain the tears of a forgotten goddess. A boy carries a basket of tiny offerings, beads, flowers, dried fish. He shouts out deals like a street hawker, 2 blessings for the price of 1. Worship local. You realize this isn't mockery, it's economy. The ancients didn't separate the sacred from the ordinary. Buying bread, blessing a child, or sealing a trade were all part of the same system, a network of divine exchanges. The world was crowded with spirits and deities, each responsible for a different corner of reality. If something existed, there was a god for it, and if there wasn't, someone would invent one. A scribe sits cross-legged beneath a tattered awning, etching names into wet clay. He's making official records of worship, divine receipts. The gods must be accounted for, he mutters. If they're not written, they fade. You watch as he presses each mark with care, sealing eternity into symbols that only a handful of people can read. It strikes you how fragile the divine really is. dependent on memory, on repetition, on humans willing to keep the books balanced. In the center of the market, a fountain gurgles lazily. Offerings float on its surface, coins, petals, bits of bread. A priestess stands nearby, eyes closed, reciting a prayer that has probably been repurposed 100 times for 100 different gods. Her voice is steady, but you can hear the exhaustion in it. Even the holy must hustle here. You start to see the beauty in the chaos. Every transaction, every whispered prayer is a thread in a vast, shimmering web of belief. No single god rules here. Instead, they coexist, overlapping like the noise of 1,000 voices at once. It's messy, human, and oddly comforting. As the day wanes, the market glows gold with the light of the setting sun. Smoke from incense rises in soft spirals, drifting toward the heavens, or maybe just into the air. The vendors pack away their idols, folding up their faith until tomorrow. You walk away with a small figurine in your pocket. You're not sure why. Maybe to remember that once belief was something you could hold in your hands. Behind you, the bazaar quiets. A breeze moves through the empty stalls, rustling the offerings that remain. For a moment, it sounds like laughter, or maybe it's the murmur of 1,000 tiny gods still whispering their prices to the wind. 8. The lovers turn to stars. Two gods fall in love, defy their pantheon, and vanish into the night sky. Their worshippers swear they became constellations. You lie on your back, gazing upward, realizing that even eternity has a public relations problem. Stars outlive their legends. The air is cool, the kind of quiet that feels infinite. Above you, the heavens shimmer, not with divinity, but with distance. Somewhere up there, they say, are the traces of two gods who chose love over power. Their names are mostly forgotten, their temples buried, but the story endures like starlight, old, faint, and still traveling. In the beginning their love was forbidden. He was a god of war, all fire and discipline, sworn to protect the heavens from chaos. She was a goddess of dawn, gentle but unyielding, tasked with bringing the world from shadow to light each morning. They met in the hour between night and day, when neither realm held dominion. For a while that was enough, stolen moments painted in gold and indigo. But love, even divine love, demands more than secrecy. Their union threatened the order of things. The other gods warned them. The heavens are not for love. They are for law, but they didn't listen. They built their own world in the twilight, where dawn and dusk embraced forever. And as all forbidden loves go, theirs burned too brightly to last. When they were discovered, the punishment was swift. The sky itself split in grief, lightning tearing through clouds like veins. Yet even as they were torn apart, they reached for each other, fingertips brushing through eternity. The myths say that in pity, or perhaps in envy, the higher powers transformed them into stars. One became the morning light, rising before all others, the herald of hope. The other became the evening flame, guiding travelers through the darkness. They would never meet again, but every dawn and dusk, the sky blushes, a brief reunion in color. That glow, people said, was their love surviving punishment. You look up, trying to spot them, but which stars were theirs? Every culture chose differently. The Greeks called them Eos and Astraeus, or sometimes lovers unnamed. The Babylonians saw them as Ishtar and her mortal shepherd, bound by fate. In China they were the cowherd and the weaver girl, separated by the Milky Way, allowed to meet once a year when magpies form a bridge across the sky. Different names, same ache. Humanity keeps retelling this story because the heavens never stop reminding us of distance. You imagine what it would feel like to live forever as light, to burn for centuries, beautiful and unreachable. Perhaps that's the tragedy of becoming a star, to be seen by everyone, but touched by no one. The lovers became immortal not through victory, but through loss. Every child who looks up at the night sky keeps their story alive, even without knowing it. The gods may have been forgotten, but the feeling, longing stretched across eternity, is too human to fade. The grass around you rustles with the night wind. Somewhere a river mirrors the sky, scattering the constellations like broken glass. For a fleeting moment you feel connected to everything, to the stars, to the forgotten gods, to every soul who ever looked up and whispered a name into the dark. Maybe that's the secret they left behind. Love doesn't end, it transforms. The sky is just another kind of memory, vast enough to hold what the world cannot. The lovers are still there, hidden in the pattern of light, not asking to be found, only to be remembered. As you close your eyes, the stars blur into motion, like embers drifting upward. Somewhere between sleep and sky, you can almost hear them. Two voices, faint and eternal, laughing softly as they pass each other once more. 9. The flood that drowned a god. When the great flood came, not every god made it out. Some temples washed away, some names forgotten with the mud. You cling to a drifting plank, wondering whether faith can swim. The rain doesn't fall, it roars. Sheets of water blur the horizon, erasing mountains, cities, and memory itself. The air tastes of metal and thunder. You can't tell where the river ends and the sky begins. Somewhere beneath the surface, idols tumble like stones, their carved eyes open, unseeing. The flood isn't just drowning people, it's drowning meaning. The priests had warned of it, of course. Every civilization has. A flood is the most honest kind of apocalypse. Cleansing, simple, impartial. They said the gods sent it. But now, as you float past a half-submerged ziggurat, you can't help but wonder if the gods were the ones swept away first. Maybe they built their temples too close to the river. Maybe eternity forgot to waterproof itself. The stories always talk about survivors. One man, one boat, one chosen family. But there were others clinging to broken rooftops, shouting names no longer answered. In one tale, a fisherman saw a statue of his river god, face down in the current, its crown tangled in reeds. He tried to pull it up, but it was too heavy, so he let it go, whispering a farewell as it drifted downstream. From that day on, the river had no name. You imagine what it must have looked like when the temple walls cracked, the sacred fires hissing out, the sound of hymns replaced by rushing water, the priests trying to lift relics onto rafts, tablets, scrolls, bones, anything that might float long enough to be remembered. Faith reduced to flotsam. There is a kind of mercy in this chaos. The flood doesn't discriminate between sinner and saint, between God and mortal. It washes everything back to the same beginning, the water that birthed both creation and destruction. Perhaps that's why so many myths start here, with drowning. The slate wiped clean, the sky reflected perfectly in the water's surface, waiting for a new name to rise. Somewhere beneath the waves, a statue of a forgotten god tilts onto its side. Silt drifts through its hollow eyes. A fish passes through its mouth, unbothered. The divine, dethroned, becomes part of the current, an ecosystem of memory and mud. Maybe the gods never died. They simply adapted. Maybe they learned to breathe underwater. As you drift, the storm begins to soften. The rain slows to a whisper, the world exhaling after its own undoing. The water glows faintly with sunrise, a new beginning pretending not to notice what it has replaced. In the distance, the top of a mountain pierces the clouds, the promise of land. The Ark myths always end here, a survivor crawling ashore, shivering, kissed by a rainbow that claims peace has returned. But peace is just what's left when everything loud has been washed away. You close your eyes and listen to the soft slap of water against the wood. You think of the drowned god, nameless now, voiceless but somehow freer. Maybe the flood wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was a retirement. When the world starts again, people will invent new gods, build new temples, light new fires. But the old ones will still be there, deep below, dreaming in the dark, content to let others carry the burden of belief. And as you finally drift toward land, you whisper a quiet prayer, not for rescue, not for mercy, but for memory. Because if the gods can drown, then remembering might be the only act of worship that truly matters. 10. The god who demanded silence. He didn't want songs or sacrifices or statues, just quiet. A dangerous request in a world of shouting prophets. You sit in the darkness wondering if this god still exists, maybe hidden in every peaceful night's sleep. In a time when devotion was noise, drums, bells, chants that climbed like smoke into the heavens, his temples were empty. No incense, no gold, no choir, only still air and the soft hum of the world when everyone finally stopped talking. They called him many things: the absent one, the listener, the breath between words. His true name, if he ever had one, was lost long ago, perhaps deliberately. To speak it would have broken his first and only law. He was not a god of punishment, but of restraint. His commandments were simple: speak less, listen more, not just to others, but to the spaces between things, the pause before the dawn birds sing, the moment after the last word of a prayer. To his followers, silence wasn't emptiness. It was the sound of the divine inhaling. They built no grand temples, only caves and hollows where the wind could whisper uninterrupted. Their rituals consisted of waiting, waiting for the world to speak on its own. But the other gods despised him. To them, worship was performance, and performance required an audience. They demanded songs and sacrifice, thunder and flame. A god who refused adoration was a threat, not because he wanted nothing, but because he needed nothing. When people began turning away from the temples of gold to sit quietly by rivers instead, the loud gods grew jealous. They sent visions, storms, earthquakes, anything to drown out the quiet. And yet his followers endured. You can't destroy silence, you can only fill it, and eventually the noise exhausts itself. The myths say that in the end he withdrew from the world, not in anger but in mercy. He saw humanity's need to be heard and understood that silence could not compete with sound. So he stepped back, fading into the folds of twilight where words dissolve. But before leaving, he gave his last commandment. When the noise grows unbearable, you will find me again. You wonder what it must have felt like to worship a god who never answered because the answer was already there. His temples were not for asking, but for remembering. The worshippers would gather at dusk, light no fires, and sit until the stars appeared. The sound of breathing, the rustle of robes, the heartbeat in their chests. These were their hymns. The highest act of faith was to say nothing at all. Now, thousands of years later, his name has vanished, but his presence lingers in unexpected places, in the hush before snowfall, in the long pause between thunder and rain, in the sigh that escapes you when the world finally slows down. Perhaps that's how he survives, woven into the fabric of rest itself. Every quiet moment becomes a kind of prayer. The candle beside you flickers low. You can hear your own pulse, the rhythm of blood and breath, the symphony of being alive. No choirs, no crowds, just you and the stillness. Maybe that's all worship was ever meant to be, a moment when the universe stops demanding and simply is. Somewhere in that infinite calm, the old God listens. Not for praise, not for apology, just for silence. The kind that doesn't need to be earned. The kind that feels like home. You close your eyes and the quiet folds around you like a blanket. The world softens, thoughts slow. For a fleeting instant you think you hear him, not as a voice but as absence itself, deep and endless. The God who demanded silence has not vanished. He was just waiting for you to stop speaking long enough to notice. 11. The Feast of the Vanishing Idols. It's festival day. The streets are filled with music and fire, but slowly, one by one, the idols are removed. A new empire has arrived with better gods. You watch as old ones are melted down, their gold resmelted into new faces. Divine recycling. At first, no one notices. The drums still thunder, the dancers still spin, the air still smells of roasted grain and sweet wine. The people chant the same hymns they always have, half out of habit, half out of hope that the new rulers will keep the old gods on the guest list. But change never announces itself loudly. It arrives disguised, in the gleam of new coinage, in the way soldiers replace priests at the temple gates, in the unfamiliar symbols carved above doorways. By the time anyone realizes, the altars have already been cleared. You follow the crowd toward the main square. The great procession winds through the streets, carrying statues that have been paraded for generations. Gods of harvest, of love, of protection. Their faces are streaked with ash and garlands, but when the priests reach the plaza, the music falters. The old idols are placed not on altars, but beside the fire pits. One by one the torches rise. You hear the first hiss of melting gold, and the crowd falls silent. A herald reads from a tablet in a new tongue. He speaks of unity, of progress, of one God, one empire. The words roll like smooth stones, rehearsed, impersonal. The people bow, unsure whether in reverence or fear. A woman near you begins to cry quietly. Her family once tended one of the smaller shrines now being dismantled. Her god was not mighty or famous, just a household spirit who guarded her doorstep. But in the new order there is no room for small gods. The molten idols are poured into molds, the faces of the new divine regime. The metal cools quickly in the night air, hardening into unfamiliar expressions. It's strange, you think, how faith can be melted down and rebranded like currency. The shape changes, but the shimmer remains the same. Somewhere in that gold are the features of gods no one will ever speak of again. The feast continues out of obligation. Children dance, lanterns sway, and food is served. But beneath the noise is a hollow stillness. the collective awareness that something irreversible has happened. The city feels lighter, emptier, like a house just after its last guest has gone. The old gods do not rage or cry. They simply fade, content to be forgotten with dignity. You wander to the edge of the festival, where a few of the discarded idols lie in shadow, too tarnished or too humble to be worth melting. A cracked statue of a goddess with missing arms, a clay bull chipped at the horns. You kneel beside them, brushing off the dust. Their eyes seem closed, as if asleep. You wonder if they know what's happening. Perhaps they do. Perhaps gods only die when no one cares enough to touch them. Somewhere beyond the city walls, the river glints in the firelight. Fragments of broken idols are thrown into it, vanishing beneath the surface. Tomorrow, those same waters will carry traces of the old world downstream, tiny flecks of gold, invisible but enduring. The new gods will rise, their names etched into fresh stone, their temples clean and bright. But deep in the current, the old ones will still shimmer faintly, eternal in their dissolution. As the last drumbeat fades, you realize that the festival isn't a celebration at all. It's a funeral disguised as joy. Faith doesn't disappear. It changes shape just like the molten idols. The crowd begins to disperse, their laughter thin, uncertain. The fire crackles, devouring the last wooden effigy. You look once more at the empty plinths, still warm from centuries of worship, and whisper a quiet farewell. The night wind carries the scent of smoke and gold. Somewhere in the darkness you think you hear a voice, calm, almost amused, whispering, "We have worn many faces before." Then it's gone, lost to the flames, leaving only the faint glow of 1,000 vanished gods, reflected in the eyes of those who can still remember. 12. The priest who knew too much. You meet the last priest of a dying god. He still lights candles every dusk, even though no one comes. His faith isn't devotion anymore. It's habit, like checking your email when you know there's nothing there. The temple is quiet now, its great stone courtyard cracked with weeds. The air smells of oil and damp, and the flame he tends flickers weakly, fighting the drafts that slither through the broken walls. He moves slowly, with the caution of someone who knows the gods don't look kindly on mistakes, even when they've stopped listening. You ask him why he keeps at it. He doesn't answer at first. He just smiles, the kind of tired smile that says he's heard that question 100 times, and never once found a better reply than, "Because it's what I do." He tells you his god's name, though it means nothing to you. Once it would have carried power, capable of ending storms or sparing kings. Now it's just a shape in the air, a relic in sound. The priest remembers when the temple was full, merchants offering coins for good fortune, mothers whispering prayers for children, soldiers bowing before battle. The god's voice, he says, used to fill this place like thunder. But thunder fades. Echoes last longer than faith. You notice the cracks in the altar, the burn marks on the walls. Once this was a place of miracles. Now it's more like a waiting room for extinction. The priest continues lighting the candles. He doesn't hurry. He never has. He knows the ritual by heart, which flame first, which direction to bow, which word to whisper. It's muscle memory more than worship. He speaks softly as he works. "The gods need us more than we need them," he says. "When people stopped believing my god didn't die, he just thinned like smoke. I can still feel him sometimes when the wind hits the flame just right. It's like he's trying to remember what warmth was. His voice trembles slightly, but it's not sadness you hear. It's weariness, the fatigue of someone who has held on longer than he was ever asked to. You sit with him for a while. The light shifts as the sun sets, turning the cracked mosaics gold for a few fleeting minutes. He looks at them fondly, like an old man remembering laughter that once filled these walls. When they came with their new gods, he continues, they told me to stop, said it was blasphemy to feed a dead name. But what harm is there in a flame? He pauses, studying the last candle as it catches. What harm in remembering? Outside, the world has moved on. The city beyond the temple walls hums with new prayers, new idols, new names carved into stone. But inside, time feels slow and deliberate. The air hums with the low heartbeat of devotion, stripped bare. No ceremony, no audience, just persistence. The priest isn't waiting for his god to return. He knows better than that. He's keeping the promise that someone made long before him, to remember. Before you leave, he presses something into your hand, a fragment of the temple's old seal. The once sharp symbol is worn smooth, the stone cool from his touch. If you ever pass a place that feels too quiet, he says, light something. Doesn't have to be for him. Just light it. The silence gets lonely. You walk away into the deepening dusk, the faint smell of smoke following you. Behind, the priest moves like a shadow among the flickering lights. You can almost hear him whisper to the empty air, voice trembling with the devotion of habit. I am still here. And maybe that's what faith really is. Not belief, not certainty, but endurance. The act of keeping something alive, even after the world has stopped caring. The last candle glows faintly against the dark, a small rebellion against forgetting. 13. The whispering statues. Some say old statues whisper at night. You press your ear against cool stone and swear you hear a voice. But maybe it's just wind, or maybe it's a god realizing they've been forgotten. The courtyard is empty, long abandoned by worshippers. Moonlight spills across cracked marble, tracing faded faces with silver light. Each statue stands in silence, a parade of chipped divinities, their eyes clouded with lichen, their mouths softened by rain. Yet, in the stillness, the air feels expectant, as though the night itself is holding its breath. You listen, and the silence isn't silent at all. It hums, faint, irregular, like breath drawn through stone lungs. You step closer to one of them, a god whose name you can't remember. His hand is outstretched, palm open, as though offering or asking. The marble is cold, colder than it should be. Beneath your fingertips, you feel a pulse that isn't quite a vibration, more like a thought, trapped deep inside. The stories say the old gods never truly die. They retreat into their images, waiting for someone to remember their names. Perhaps they dream inside these statues, restless, whispering to anyone willing to listen. The voice comes softly at first, just a murmur like the shifting of wind through hollow cracks. Then it grows clearer, as though the stone itself is trying to remember how to speak. You can't make out the words, but the tone is unmistakable. Pleading. There's loneliness in it, the kind that only beings once worshipped by thousands could know. You wonder how long they've been trapped here, standing guard over nothing, their temples turned to ruins, their prayers replaced by museum plaques. You move from statue to statue, each whispering in a slightly different rhythm. A goddess with one wing left hums a tune like rainfall. A broken-faced warrior god breathes out something between a sigh and a growl. A childlike deity of rivers murmurs a name. Maybe yours, maybe their own. It's eerie, but not frightening. You realize they're not haunting you. They're hoping you'll answer. Long ago, people would have come here with offerings, figs, wine, a bit of silver. They'd bow, speak, ask for favor. Now the only offerings are time and attention. You kneel, unsure what to do. Maybe worship isn't needed anymore. Maybe just listening is enough. The whispers quiet for a moment, as if the statues are waiting. You whisper back a simple hello. The air trembles, almost warm now, and for a second you think you hear laughter, faint, distant, like a memory remembering itself. It strikes you how strange it is, this afterlife of stone. The gods, once radiant and feared, reduced to conversation pieces for night wanderers. And yet, maybe this is the truest kind of immortality. To exist only when someone notices you. To speak only when someone cares enough to press an ear to your heart of marble. A breeze stirs, winding through the colonnade. The whispers blend together, forming a low, melodic hum. You close your eyes and breathe it in. The scent of moss, rain, and old incense burned centuries ago. It feels less like you're listening to ghosts and more like you're standing inside memory itself. Every crack, every erosion is a syllable in a story the world tried to erase. Eventually, the night deepens. The voices fade back into stillness, content for now. The courtyard returns to silence, or something close to it. You step back, the moon now high and pale. Before you leave, you turn once more. The statues seem to watch you, not accusingly, but with gratitude. You realize that to them, being heard even once might be enough. As you walk away, the wind shifts again. Behind you, in the dark, a single whisper drifts across the stones, soft, patient, eternal. Remember me. 14. The War of the Pantheons. You stand in the middle of a battlefield. Gods versus gods, believers versus believers. Every spear thrust decides which deity gets a holiday next year. It's exhausting being mortal in a divine popularity contest. Dust rises, blood thickens, and yet the loudest sound is not steel or screams, but prayer, hundreds of voices shouting to their own heavens for protection. You realize that this isn't a war for land or gold, it's a war for meaning. Behind every banner, a god is watching, tallying devotion like a merchant counting coins. Every temple in every city has chosen a side, and each believer's victory or death becomes a vote in the divine census. It's an ancient story. Pantheons once existed like rival kingdoms, Egypt's Ra against Babylon's Marduk, Greece's Zeus against Persia's Ahura Mazda. But wars of gods are really wars of people, and people are terribly persistent. When one empire rose, its gods rose too, and when that empire fell, its gods went down with it, buried beneath rubble and rewritten myths. Religion, it turned out, was not eternal. It was scalable. You move through the chaos, and you can almost see them, not just soldiers, but symbols. Each army fights not just with weapons, but with songs and relics. The priests at the edges raise idols high above the crowd, hoping the sight alone might sway fortune. On one side, a statue of a sun god gleams with gold leaf, reflecting the light into the enemy's eyes. On the other, the carved face of a storm deity stares down from a wagon, its mouth open in a silent roar. The wind shifts. A dust storm sweeps across the plain, swallowing banners and faces alike. For a moment, it's impossible to tell who's winning or who's praying to whom. It hits you then. Maybe the gods aren't fighting for humans at all. Maybe they're fighting through them. The battlefield becomes an altar, the blood the offering, the noise the hymn. Stories say that in the heavens this war mirrors the one below. The gods clash in the clouds, lightning against wind, sea against flame. Each believes themselves righteous, destined to rule the divine order. Yet as centuries pass, even the victors fade. No matter how mighty, every pantheon eventually becomes a museum exhibit, every hymn a curiosity whispered in classrooms. The wars never truly end. They just move to quieter fronts. You imagine the aftermath, the survivors returning home, clutching relics of broken gods, amulets, scrolls, cracked idols. They'll rebuild the temples, rename the festivals, pretend their side was chosen by fate. But deep down, they'll know. The gods didn't win, they evolved. The storm god becomes the god of war, the sun god becomes the god of kingship. The pantheon reorganizes, mergers and acquisitions of the divine. Religion becomes mythology. Mythology becomes memory. The hierarchy resets. By nightfall, the battlefield lies still. The air smells of iron and incense. Priests walk among the fallen, whispering last rites to whoever's listening. Maybe one god, maybe many, maybe none at all. Above, the sky glows faintly, streaked with red like a half-erased mural. You look up and wonder if the heavens feel crowded. So many abandoned thrones, so many names forgotten. And somewhere, perhaps in a realm beyond sight, the gods themselves grow tired. They watch their worshippers burn cities for their glory and begin to question what glory means. Perhaps that's the final truth of the Pantheon Wars, that immortality breeds boredom, and divinity is just another form of exhaustion. When you finally close your eyes, the echoes fade, the banners, the prayers, the thunder, all dissolve into silence. The battlefield becomes just earth again, and the gods drift back into myth. Tomorrow, someone new will rise, build a shrine, light a candle, and start the game all over. Because in the end, belief itself is the most enduring empire, and humanity, for all its exhaustion, will always be at war for wonder. 15. The queen who became a god. Then, didn't you meet a queen who declared herself divine? It worked for a decade. Then her temple became a barn. You can still see her face in the walls, smudged by centuries of goats. Her name was once whispered beside thunder, carved into stone in letters of gold. She was the morning star of her empire, radiant, untouchable, wrapped in perfume and prophecy. In her prime, she convinced her people that divinity could be achieved by charisma alone. No lightning bolts, no miracles, just presence. The way she entered a room made even seasoned generals forget their conquests. Power, she knew, was as much about belief as bloodline. And so she claimed the highest title she could imagine, not queen, but goddess. At first, it worked perfectly. Her image appeared on coins, her statues replaced the older gods in temples, her name was woven into daily prayers. Festivals celebrated her as the living bridge between heaven and earth. People lined up for days to glimpse her procession, shimmering robes, slow smile, eyes painted with malachite that never blinked. To see her was to believe that the divine had descended in human form. And for a while the divine seemed pleased to play along. But the problem with mortal divinity is maintenance. Real gods don't age, humans do. The years began to carve fine lines where perfection used to live. The voice that once commanded crowds now trembled. Crops failed, armies lost battles, and suddenly the goddess queen began to look suspiciously human again. Faith has never been loyal. It shifts with fortune. The priests who once sang her praises started speaking softly of balance being restored. The people still bowed, but their eyes darted toward the horizon, looking for a new miracle. When the first revolt came, it wasn't dramatic. No lightning, no fire. Just whispers, farmers refusing to send grain to the temple, artisans leaving her symbols unfinished. The great statue of her likeness, once polished daily with rose oil, began to gather dust. When the palace finally fell, no one destroyed her temple. They simply stopped visiting. The silence was the loudest rebellion of all. Now, centuries later, you walk through the ruins. The pillars still stand, though the marble is pitted and gray. Goats wander freely where choirs once sang. In the faint sunlight filtering through the broken roof, you can still make out the contours of her face, serene, faintly smiling, carved into a wall now used to tether animals. Her eyes, though eroded, still seem to watch. Not in anger, not even in sadness, just in understanding. Because maybe she always knew it would end this way. Every mortal god does. They burn bright, not forever. It isn't blasphemy, it's biology. The same hubris that makes humans divine also ensures they can't stay that way. Yet something of her remains, a curve of stone, a name half preserved in an old hymn, a whisper that refuses to die. Even the goats, in their clumsy way, keep her memory alive by tracing paths through her sanctuary, scattering dust that still smells faintly of incense. You imagine her ghost watching from the rafters, amused. She's seen kings come and go, religions rise and crumble. She knows now that being a god is less about eternity and more about endurance, about how long your story can linger after you're gone. And as the light fades, the walls turn amber, and her smile softens into shadow. For a moment, the barn feels holy again. The air hums with a memory too stubborn to vanish. She is forgotten, yes, but not erased. Perhaps that's the truest form of divinity. Not endless worship, but the quiet persistence of being remembered, even by those who no longer know your name. 16. The god of broken promises. He was small, petty, and endlessly worshipped by politicians. His followers prospered briefly, then disappeared. You wonder if he's still around, maybe in every unreturned text and missed deadline. His name has been lost, worn down by centuries of half-hearted prayers and cancelled plans. The ancients said he wasn't born like other gods. No thunder, no prophecy, no divine parentage. He came into being the first time a promise was broken. When a merchant swore to repay a debt and didn't, when a lover vowed forever and meant until winter. That's when he stirred, not with fury but with amusement. Every failure to keep one's word was an offering, every forgotten oath a hymn. He was a god of comfort for those who lied beautifully. He forgave not because he was kind, but because it amused him to watch mortals trip over their own sincerity. His temples were small, discreet, built near marketplaces and council halls, where promises were currency and truth was negotiable. Inside, his altars were cluttered with contracts, broken seals, torn love letters, and the ashes of unsigned treaties. His priests wore silver tongues and nervous smiles. They didn't demand honesty, only participation. In his time, he was beloved, or at least necessary. Empires run on promises, and he was the lubricant that kept the gears turning. People prayed to him before negotiations, not for success, but for plausible deniability. He was the invisible witness in every deal, ensuring that both sides could later claim divine misunderstanding. His sigil, a knot tied in wet rope, symbolized an agreement destined to unravel. But as with all tricksters, admiration turned to resentment. When crops failed, when marriages dissolved, when treaties shattered, the people needed someone to blame. They cursed his name, dismantled his shrines, and burned the records of his existence. Yet, even as the flames rose, he must have smiled, because that, too, was a promise broken. You can almost feel him in the modern air, thinner, quieter, but not gone. He's evolved with the times. He no longer needs temples. He lives in emails that start with "Hope you're well" and end with silence. He whispers through political speeches, in boardroom apologies, in the click of "I agree to terms and conditions" no one has read. His priests now wear suits, their altars made of glowing screens. His offerings are delays, cancellations, polite lies told in the name of progress. He thrives in half-finished projects and forgotten resolutions, in the gray zone where intention fades into convenience. Every soon, every next time, every let's catch up is a prayer in his honor. You might not worship him consciously, but you serve him all the same. He is the quiet god of avoidance, the deity of deferred truth. And yet, there's something strangely human about him. He doesn't punish, he doesn't demand confessions. He simply waits, patient, amused, immortal, feeding on our ability to overpromise and underdeliver. Maybe he understands that broken promises are part of the mortal condition, the evidence that we want to be better, even when we fail. Tonight, as you lie in bed, you think of all the words you didn't say, the calls you didn't return, the plans you postponed. Somewhere he's listening, chuckling softly in the dark. Not cruelly, just knowingly. After all, you promised yourself an early night too, didn't you? And when sleep finally takes you, perhaps he lingers by your bedside, the god of broken promises, collecting the dreams you'll forget to chase tomorrow. 17. The echoes, beneath the sand. You help excavate a ruined shrine. Beneath layers of sand, a stone tablet whispers a forgotten name. You can't read it, but you feel it. The heartbeat of something ancient, waiting for attention again. The desert is quiet, but not silent. Every gust of wind carries a faint hiss, as if the dunes themselves are speaking, not in words, but in memory. You brush away centuries of dust with a trembling hand, revealing the grooves of an inscription no scholar has seen in 1,000 lifetimes. It isn't language exactly, more like rhythm, like breath, the kind of writing made for gods, not for men. The air feels heavier the deeper you dig. You uncover fragments, the corner of a statue, a chipped bowl, the skeletal outline of an altar. Once, this place must have been alive with worship, its walls painted in pigments now lost to the sun. Incense would have curled upward in thin ribbons, prayers spilling like honey into the night. Now only sand remains, patient, endless, burying what it cannot forget. You pause to rest. The heat is relentless, pressing down like the weight of history itself. The others in your team joke and drink from canteens, but you can't shake the feeling that the ground beneath you is listening. You remember the stories of desert travelers who swore they heard voices in the dunes, not ghosts, but echoes of the ancient world replaying themselves. Perhaps the gods, long starved of attention, still murmur to those who disturb their rest. That night by the fire, you study the tablet under a lantern's flicker. The markings seem to move when the light shifts, rearranging themselves into shapes you almost recognize. Waves, eyes, a hand reaching upward. You wonder if this was a god of silence, or of memory, or maybe of time itself. The ancients worshipped everything that could vanish, rivers, stars, breath. It would make sense to also worship what remained. You imagine the people who built this shrine. They carried stones through blazing heat, sang hymns to a deity they believed could hear them through the wind. They must have feared being forgotten, that their lives, their cities, their gods would one day disappear under the same sand you now brush away. And yet, here you are, centuries later, answering their prayer without meaning to. They built for eternity, and in a way they succeeded. A desert fox darts across the site, silent as smoke. The fire crackles, the dunes shift, and the wind hums low, almost melodic. You close your eyes, and for a heartbeat, the air feels different, cooler, as if the shrine remembers being sacred. You see flashes, torches in the night, dancers circling the altar, the sound of drums rising with the wind. The scene fades, but the rhythm lingers, the heartbeat beneath the sand. When morning comes, the sky is pale and endless. The tablet lies beside you, glowing faintly in the dawn. No one else seems to notice. You trace the unknown letters one last time and whisper the name you cannot read. The wind stops for just a moment and you feel it. Acknowledgement. A presence not gone, merely waiting. You pack the tablet carefully, knowing it will be studied, catalogued, and probably misinterpreted. But the desert doesn't care for translation. It keeps its own records, not on paper, but in silence, in the weight of forgotten things. As you leave the site, a gust sweeps across the dunes, filling your footprints before you've taken 10 steps. The shrine disappears again beneath the shifting sands, patient as ever. Somewhere beneath the surface, the echoes remain, humming softly, waiting for the next curious soul to listen. 18. The city that forgot its own god. Once this city built 100 temples. Now no one remembers which god was theirs. You walk through streets lined with empty plinths, realizing that divine extinction looks a lot like urban decay. The stones still remember, even if the people don't. Their surfaces are worn smooth by centuries of hands, by worshippers who once pressed their foreheads against the cool marble in reverence. The air would have been thick with incense, the sound of bells echoing between painted walls. Every morning the city woke to the music of devotion, priests chanting, merchants offering, pilgrims kneeling at thresholds. Back then the gods walked these streets as surely as shadows do now. But memory is fragile. It fades not with disaster but with disinterest. The decline began quietly, a skipped festival here, an unmended roof there. The offerings grew smaller, the processions shorter. The gods were patient, as gods often are, until patience turned to neglect. One by one their names stopped being spoken. Without tongues to carry them, even divinity turns to dust. You wander into the old temple quarter. It's eerily intact. The architecture survived better than belief. The columns still stand, the mosaic floors still shimmer faintly under the dust, but the altars are bare. The inscriptions are eroded to gibberish, as if the language itself conspired to forget. No idols remain. They were melted, stolen, or simply carried away to decorate newer shrines. A pigeon flutters down from the rafters, landing where prayers once gathered. Its coo echoes like mockery. What strikes you most is how ordinary it all feels. The city moves on as cities do. Children play among the ruins, merchants use temple courtyards as storerooms, and street vendors sell fruit beneath crumbling friezes of gods no one can name. Faith, it seems, has a half-life. Long after belief dies, its monuments linger, haunting the living like architectural ghosts. Historians argue endlessly about which deity once ruled here. Some say a sky god, others a mother goddess, still others a pantheon long since dissolved into myths of surrounding lands. But you suspect that the truth no longer matters. Gods survive only as long as they're remembered. Their power is sustained by repetition, by the small acts of faith that keep their names alive. Once that stops, they don't die spectacularly. They just fade, like a candle left to burn in an empty room. You pause at the grandest ruin, a massive hall crowned with a fractured dome. The wind sighs through its open roof, scattering dust in spirals. On the far wall, faint carvings depict a god's face, or what's left of it. Half an eye, a broken jawline, the trace of a crown. The artistry suggests reverence, the decay, indifference. You reach out to touch it, and the stone is warm, almost alive. For a second you imagine the god still there, diminished, yes, but listening. Perhaps that's the cruelest truth of all. The gods may never fully vanish. They linger, half awake, fed by accidents, a tourist's gasp, a child's question, the flicker of curiosity that brings a name back into the air. Each mention is a heartbeat, faint but persistent. Even a forgotten god dreams of revival. As night falls, the city glows with electric light. The ruins cast long shadows across glass towers and neon signs. The modern hum of traffic replaces the sound of hymns. You realize this city never truly stopped worshipping. It just changed its gods. Now they are wealth, convenience, progress. Altars made of screens, priests replaced by algorithms. The temples are open 24 hours, and everyone bows, not out of faith, but out of habit. You walk past one last plinth, cracked but standing. A vine winds around its base, delicate leaves reaching for the stars. It feels like a prayer no one intended. You wonder what name the city would give its god now if it remembered how to pray. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe in the quiet between the lights, the old god listens still, patient, fading, but never fully gone, waiting for one voice brave enough to call it home. 19. The Oracle's Last Vision. The old oracle sits by her fire, blind and laughing. She speaks a prophecy that no one writes down. You listen, not knowing that this is the final time her god will ever speak through human lips. The fire crackles, spitting sparks into the cold night. Her tent smells of smoke and cedar, of old wool and something metallic. The scent of rain that never arrives. Her hair is a storm of white, her skin mapped with the fine cracks of a life spent as a conduit. She doesn't look divine. She looks human, small, weathered, almost forgotten. And yet, when she opens her mouth, the world leans closer to hear. Once her words shaped kingdoms. Kings rode for days to kneel at her feet, trembling to know whether war or peace awaited them. Her god spoke through her like thunder through a valley, clear, booming, inevitable. Every prophecy she gave was carved into stone, carried by scribes, celebrated in festivals. But now there are no scribes, no kings, no audience, only the wind through the cracks of the old shrine and the whisper of flames. You sit across from her, half afraid, half entranced. She laughs softly, a sound both wise and broken. "They've all gone," she says, her milky eyes staring into nothing. "The gods, the heroes, the ones who listened. Even the echoes have grown tired." Her hands hover above the fire, trembling but steady enough to command respect. "But one more thing wants to be said," she adds, and suddenly the air feels thick, electric. Her laughter fades into silence. Then her voice changes. It's still hers, but something vast hums beneath it, like an ocean beneath thin ice. The words come slowly, each one deliberate, as if drawn from somewhere far older than speech itself. "When memory becomes dust, the divine will hide among the forgotten. The last truth will not be written, but dreamt." You lean closer, barely breathing. Her god is fading. You can feel it, a presence unraveling in the air, thinning like smoke. The oracle speaks on, slower now, her tone both mournful and calm. "They will not return. Not as light, not as storm. They will wait inside hearts that still wonder. That will be enough." The fire dims. The wind sighs through the old temple's bones. You realize that what you've just heard will never be recorded, never repeated. The god's final message dies in the air between you, not with thunder, but with stillness. The oracle exhales, a sound almost like relief. "There," she whispers. "It's done." She reaches into the embers and draws out a single coal, holding it in her palm without flinching. "They were never meant to last," she says quietly. "Even gods must rest." Her blind eyes glimmer in the orange light. "But remember this. What they built was never stone or fire. It was awe. Keep that alive, and they will never truly be gone." You leave her hut as dawn begins to creep across the horizon. Behind you, the fire collapses with a sigh. When you turn back, the tent is empty. No oracle, no warmth, just a circle of ash where she sat. For a moment, the wind seems to echo her laughter, faint and kind. You walk on, carrying her words without quite remembering them. They're not meant for your mind, but your dreams. Somewhere far above, the stars fade with the coming light. Old gods slipping back into sleep. The world feels quieter now, but not empty. The last oracle is gone, yet her prophecy hums in the silence. The divine never dies. It just waits to be remembered. 20. The drowning of the old faith. A new religion rises. The old gods are declared false. Temples burn, scrolls vanish, priests flee. You wonder if gods die of loneliness or paperwork. The city smells of smoke and fresh paint, the scent of erasure. Where the temples once stood, scaffolds rise instead, and masons chip away at old names to carve new ones. The statues that once stared serenely over marketplaces now lie face down in the dust, their eyes gouged out, their hands broken to prevent blessing or curse. A crowd gathers, not in prayer but in curiosity, as the last priest of an obsolete god is marched through the square. He's not angry, only tired. "It's just fashion," he murmurs, and the crowd laughs. Faith turns over like soil, and the seeds of belief are easily replanted. The new priests promise clarity, simplicity, a single truth unmarred by the chaos of many gods. Their temples gleam, white and unblemished, as if purity itself can be built from stone. But beneath the marble lies the rubble of what came before, crushed idols, forgotten names, fragments of songs once sung at dawn. The old faith doesn't scream, it sinks, quietly, beneath the tide of certainty. You walk through the ruins of the old quarter, where weeds now grow between toppled columns. The frescoes are still faintly visible, gods with wings and suns for crowns, goddesses crowned with serpents and stars. They look surprised, almost amused, as if they've seen this before. Perhaps they have. Civilizations rise and fall, and every new faith begins by calling the old one wrong. But divinity is stubborn. It doesn't die cleanly. It lingers, diluted, reshaped, wearing new names like borrowed robes. In one abandoned shrine, you find a wall blackened by fire. The ceiling has collapsed and the altar is split, but the carvings remain beneath the soot. You scrape gently with your hand, revealing the outline of a god's face, patient, weathered, unbothered. His eyes seem to follow you, not pleading, not condemning, just waiting. You wonder what it feels like to be immortal yet forgotten, to watch your worshippers switch allegiances with the efficiency of accountants. The new faith is organized, efficient, aggressively tidy. It has committees and scrolls, rules and receipts. Its priests debate doctrine while the last whispers of the old gods fade like incense smoke. They say the ancient faith was primitive. Too many gods, too much confusion. But perhaps confusion was the point. Maybe the world was never meant to be reduced to a single explanation. At night, when the fires die down and the new temples sleep, you feel something stir in the ruins. The wind shifts, carrying faint music, a language older than liturgy. You close your eyes, and for a heartbeat, the air smells like the old festivals, honey, myrrh, salt from the sea. You see people dancing again, barefoot and joyous, their laughter rising like a hymn. It lasts only a moment before the night swallows it. But it's enough. The past still hums beneath the surface, like a heartbeat beneath water. And maybe that's what the drowning really means. Not death, but silence. The old gods aren't gone, they're submerged. They wait below the surface of history, in our idioms, in our symbols, in the way we still look to the sky when we're desperate. The temples burn, but the instinct remains. The prayer survives the priest. As dawn breaks, the new religion's bells ring out across the city, triumphant, orderly, certain. The priests proclaim renewal. The crowd repeats their words. But beneath their polished voices, the earth still hums with something older, rougher, realer. You walk away from the crowd toward the river. Its surface glimmers with the first light of day, calm, endless, unjudging. Somewhere below, the old gods drift, asleep but dreaming. The water swirls, golden and deep, as if whispering that faith, like the river, never truly dies. It only changes its course. 21. The god who became a devil, once adored, now feared. A simple rebranding by conquerors turned him from divine to demonic. You stare at the horned statue and realize every villain is just a god with bad marketing. The statue stands in the shadow of a new cathedral, its face chipped, its horns exaggerated by the hands of zealots who came after. Centuries ago, those same horns had been symbols of fertility and power, the crescent of the moon, the curve of a bull's strength. Back then, he was a god of harvests and renewal, a patron of music, wine, and the heat that ripens both fruit and desire. People danced for him, painted their bodies with ochre, sang his name beneath the stars. He was joy, chaos, the wild pulse of the world. Now he is a cautionary tale. His fall didn't happen overnight. It began with conquest, the way most divine downfalls do. When the new faith arrived, it came with soldiers, banners, and a god who promised order over passion. The priests of the invaders didn't need to destroy the old gods, they only needed to rename them. And so the god of revelry became the god of sin. The god of nature became the god of temptation. The horned one, once crowned with moonlight, was recast as the enemy of heaven. A few clever edits to scripture, a few centuries of repetition, and he was transformed from divine companion to eternal adversary. You can almost imagine him watching it happen. Statues defaced, temples burned, his festivals outlawed. He must have laughed, at least at first. What was power if not adaptation? Let them fear him, he might have thought. Fear is still a kind of worship. And in the shadows of the new temples, his followers whispered his old name, lighting candles that smelled of myrrh and rebellion. The god who became a devil still received his prayers, just softer now and with doors closed tight. Even now, pieces of him survive in the culture that condemned him. The horns, once noble, now adorn monsters in paintings and plays. His feast days became forbidden carnivals, half-remembered echoes of joy disguised as sin. The music that once called his name became hymns of warning. Every devil the new faith imagined carried a trace of him, not because he deserved it, but because they needed him. Every religion requires an opposite. Every empire needs a scapegoat. You step closer to the statue. His face is kind, almost amused, despite the vandalism. Time has smoothed his features into serenity. You notice the faintest hint of a smile at the corner of his lips. Not mockery, but understanding. He's seen civilizations rise and rewrite him before. Gods, after all, are shaped by those who tell their stories, and no one controls the storytellers forever. Perhaps he isn't angry. Perhaps he's patient. After all, fear sustains as much as love does. He lives in every forbidden thought, every defiant laugh, every quiet rebellion against sanctified order. His essence thrives wherever joy is called indecent, wherever freedom is painted as chaos. The conquerors gave him horns. He made them beautiful. Night falls, and the cathedral bells begin to toll. Their sound rolls across the valley, solemn and triumphant. But beneath it, faint and rhythmic, you can almost hear another song. Drums, laughter, footsteps circling a long-forgotten fire. It's a melody older than doctrine, older than guilt. You look again at the statue and realize the truth. He never fell. He was simply reinterpreted. The world can call him devil, demon, tempter, but in the flicker of every flame, in the heartbeat of every dance, he endures. And maybe that's his quiet victory, to be remembered not as what he was, but as what he represents, the part of the divine that refuses to be tamed. The god who became a devil didn't lose his divinity. He just learned to wear a different mask. 22. The god of small things. He never ruled the sky or sea, just protected lost sandals and cracked pottery. Forgotten by empires, but remembered by children. You smile because even the smallest gods deserve bedtime stories. His name was never carved into temple walls or shouted in victory hymns. No great statues bore his likeness. No armies marched under his banner. He was the god of the overlooked, the patron of mended things, of misplaced trinkets, of the quiet sigh after something breaks and is gently repaired. When the larger gods battled for dominion over storm and flame, he lingered in doorways and dusty corners, tending to the small miracles no one thought to thank anyone for. They say his first worshippers were potters and cobblers, people whose work lived in the cracks between necessity and beauty. They would whisper his name, a name soft as dust, before placing a clay pot into the kiln or before setting a child's first shoes to dry by the fire. He was never asked for glory, only for steadiness. If the pot didn't crack, if the sandals held together for one more journey, that was enough to prove he was listening. Over time, his following grew, not in numbers, but in sincerity. Children left him tiny offerings, a button, a pebble, a bent copper coin. They said he liked small things because they were honest. There was no grandeur in them, no pretense, just usefulness and care. The parents smiled at the superstition, but even they would murmur a quiet word when searching for a missing key or mending a torn sleeve. It cost nothing to believe in small mercies. When the empires came, loud and hungry, their gods riding behind them, his worship faded. The grand temples were built for thunder and conquest, not for mended sandals or patient craftsmanship. Priests declared that only the mightiest deities were worth devotion, and so the god of small things slipped quietly from the pantheon. No one destroyed his shrines because there were none to destroy. He simply faded into the cracks where he'd always lived. But gods like him don't truly die. They shrink, yes, until they're barely more than a feeling, a flicker of gratitude when you find something you thought you'd lost, or the comfort of an old object that's been repaired a dozen times, but still works. You can almost feel him when you thread a needle, when you pick up a dropped earring and sigh in relief. He's there in the small victories, invisible but busy, brushing the dust off the world. In some villages, his story lingers as a bedtime tale. Parents tell their children that if they whisper, "Thank you," after fixing something, the little god will smile and keep their household safe. Some say that if you drop a coin and it lands upright, it's because he caught it before it could fall flat. The skeptics call it luck. The faithful call it kindness. You imagine him now, small, round-faced, hands stained with soot and clay, his robe patched a dozen times, a god who hums while he works, content to be forgotten so long as something useful endures. He doesn't ask for temples or sacrifices, just attention, just care. The world may not need him anymore, but that doesn't bother him. He's always preferred the quiet tasks, holding loose hinges together, steadying unbalanced shelves, making sure lost things find their way home. Perhaps that's his gift to humanity, the reminder that divinity can live in the smallest gestures, the simplest repairs. As you drift towards sleep, you think of the tiny, invisible hands that keep your world intact, the clasp that doesn't break, the shoe that lasts another season, the cup that never quite shatters. You smile. Somewhere in the dark, the god of small things smiles too, still working, still humming, still keeping everything gently, lovingly held together. 23. The Library of the Lost Names. You wander through an ancient archive filled with names that once ruled empires. Every shelf is a cemetery of sound. You whisper them aloud, giving breath to voices no one has spoken in 4,000 years. The air inside is heavy, not with dust, but with memory. Scrolls curl in brittle silence, their ink faded to ghostly traces. The scent of old papyrus mingles with the dry sweetness of cedar oil once used to keep insects away. Somewhere above, the wind sighs through cracks in the roof, turning the place into a great, sleeping throat. The building seems to exhale, as if even it remembers what it once contained. You move carefully between shelves that lean like exhausted giants. Each one holds hundreds of tablets and scrolls, their labels too faint to read. The light from your torch trembles across carvings that resemble constellations, clusters of forgotten syllables, each one a world that once believed itself eternal. Some are royal names, crowned in gold. Others belong to merchants, poets, soldiers, midwives. Together they form the chorus of a civilization that no longer exists. Names were power once. To speak a name was to summon a soul. The ancients believed that a person lived as long as their name was remembered. That memory itself was a kind of afterlife. And so this library was built not to store knowledge, but to preserve being. Every tablet here was once a heartbeat. Every word was once a life. You stop before a cracked shelf, its contents half buried in sand. One clay tablet rests alone, its edges softened by time. You brush it gently, and for a moment a single glyph becomes clear. You sound it out under your breath, a soft, uncertain murmur, and the air seems to shiver in recognition. You don't know the language, but your voice feels borrowed, guided. The silence afterward hums, like something awakening just beyond your reach. You wonder who she was, the one whose name you just spoke. A queen? A servant? A child who once pressed her name into wet clay, never knowing it would outlive her by millennia? The tablet doesn't answer, but you sense gratitude, faint as the warmth left by a vanished candle. Further in, you find an entire wing collapsed, the floor swallowed by rubble. Carved above the broken lintel is an inscription in two scripts, one ancient, one newer, each trying to claim the other's place. The translation is simple. The conquerors rewrote the names, but the stones remember the originals. You run your fingers across the carved letters and realize how human the impulse is. To rename, to erase, to overwrite history with one's own version of truth. And yet the old names persist, sleeping beneath their replacements like roots beneath soil. It occurs to you that the library itself is alive, not haunted exactly, but dreaming. The air is thick with unspoken syllables, waiting for a tongue brave enough to recall them. You speak another name at random, and the torchlight flickers. You think you hear something? The faintest sigh, or perhaps laughter. Maybe it's just the wind. Maybe it isn't. You keep walking until the corridor ends in darkness. Somewhere far below your feet, the earth hums. Names layered on names, stories on stories, an ocean of memory buried beneath centuries of sand. You imagine the gods of language still listening, patient and proud, waiting for their children to speak clearly again. When you finally step outside, the desert sun blinds you. The air feels thin and raw after the hush of the library. Behind you, the wind sweeps through the ruins, scattering grains of sand like punctuation marks. You turn back once, whispering one last name, your own, just to hear it disappear into the vastness. And in that moment, you understand the true purpose of the place. Not preservation, but resurrection. Every time a name is spoken, even in ignorance, something ancient stirs. The library listens, and for one fleeting breath, the lost remember themselves. 24. The god who dreamed himself to death. They say he dreamed the world into being, then refused to wake. His followers waited centuries for him to stir. He never did. Maybe he's still dreaming somewhere, and you're part of it. The legend begins quietly, with a sigh in the dark before creation. There was no light, no time, no sound, only him drifting in endless sleep. From his dreams came warmth, then color, then motion. His thoughts shaped mountains, his heartbeat pulsed the tides, and his breath became wind. Every dream brought something new, rivers flowing through imagined valleys, stars flickering in the corners of his mind. The world bloomed like a memory before it was ever born. At first, his followers rejoiced. They built temples at the edge of lakes and deserts, believing their prayers could seep into his dreams and guide them. Every morning they recited poems to the sleeping god, hoping he might dream kindly, that his mind would remain calm and the storms of his imagination would not tear the world apart. They called him the sleeper beneath all things. They said if he ever woke, reality would collapse, for it exists only as long as he dreams it. Centuries passed, and the prayers became less hopeful, more desperate. Famines came, wars came, and still the god slept. His high priest promised signs, tremors in the earth, strange lights in the sky, proof that he would soon awaken and restore balance. But the tremors faded, and the lights turned out to be comets. People began to whisper. Perhaps the god was dying. Perhaps the dream was unraveling. You can still find the remnants of his cult in the deep valleys. Faded murals of a sleeping face surrounded by stars, altars carved with spirals meant to mimic the slow rhythm of breath. Some of his followers, unable to bear the silence, tried to enter his dream themselves. They drank the sacred waters, lay down in the temples, and fell asleep beside his effigy. They never woke. The priests said they were blessed, that their spirits had joined him, helping to sustain the dream. Skeptics called it madness, but maybe there's no difference between the two. One myth says that toward the end, when his pulse slowed and the dream began to falter, the god saw his followers waiting at the edges of his imagination. The cities they'd built, the songs they'd sung, the grief in their eyes. He wanted to wake, they said, but he couldn't. He had dreamed himself too deeply, lost in his own creation. Every attempt to open his eyes would have destroyed the world he loved. So he stayed, and the dream continued, half-conscious, fraying at the edges. Perhaps that's why reality feels fragile sometimes, why the sky seems too heavy, or why you wake from sleep with the sense that something vast has just forgotten your name. Maybe those moments are the god stirring, just for an instant, before drifting back into slumber. In the ruins of his last temple, deep in the desert, there's a pool of still water said to reflect not your face, but your dream. The pilgrims who find it speak softly there, afraid to disturb the reflection. They say if you stare long enough, you'll see landscapes move, cities crumble, faces you've never met passing by like memories. The god's dream continues, and within it, so do you. You leave the ruins as dusk settles, the sky bleeding into violet. The wind sighs over the sand, soft as breath. For a moment, the world feels suspended, unreal, perfect, delicate. You wonder if he's dreaming this sunset too, if every color in the clouds is a fragment of his imagination. And as the stars blink awake, you find yourself whispering a quiet hope that he never opens his eyes, because if he does, the dream ends, and so do we. 25. When the gods finally slept, at last the world grows quiet. The temples crumble, the prayers stop. You look at the stars, realizing that maybe the gods never vanished. They just grew tired. And maybe they're still resting while we dream for them. There was no great apocalypse, no final war of heaven and earth. Just stillness. One by one, the altars went cold. Priests packed away their robes, incense faded, and the divine names that once carried the weight of mountains slipped from memory like mist. No lightning, no curses, just a long exhale from the heavens, as if, after millennia of listening, answering, and shaping, the gods simply decided to rest. At first, humanity panicked. Farmers whispered that without their gods, the crops would fail. Sailors feared the seas would turn wild again. Kings demanded the priests bring the voices back. But the rains still came, the tides still turned, and dawn still arrived. The world kept moving, steady and indifferent. It seemed the divine machinery no longer needed divine hands. Creation had learned to run on its own. Some said the gods had grown weary of us, of the endless prayers, the contradictions, the demands. Others thought they had merely fallen asleep, retreating to dream in the space between stars, their slumber woven into the pulse of the universe. The philosophers liked that theory best. They imagined the constellations as sleeping faces, each flickering light a heartbeat of some cosmic mind still dreaming us into existence. You walk through a field where a temple once stood. The ground is littered with fragments of statues, their features eroded into anonymity. A finger here, a wing there, bits of eternity scattered among weeds. It's peaceful. The silence feels sacred in its own way. Maybe this is what the gods wanted all along. A world that didn't need them every minute. A world that could whisper its own stories into the dark. At night you lie beneath the stars. They shimmer faintly, patient, ancient. You wonder if this is what rest looks like for beings that never die. Not oblivion, but quiet observation. Perhaps every falling star is the twitch of a divine dream. Perhaps thunder is a god turning over in their sleep. The world still hums, and that hum might just be the sound of their breathing. And what if humanity has become their dream? Each invention, each work of art, each act of love, all unfolding within the endless imagination of sleeping deities. Maybe prayer was never about waking them. Maybe it was about joining them, learning to dream as they do. Every story we tell, every melody we hum into the night could be our way of keeping their dream alive, the continuation of creation through mortal hands. Somewhere in the ruins of the last temple, a small flame still burns, a candle lit by someone who refuses to stop believing, not to summon the gods back, but to give them company in their rest. A gesture of gratitude rather than desperation. After all, even gods deserve peace. You close your eyes and listen. The wind carries the faint echo of ancient hymns, not pleading now, but tender. The stars shimmer like eyes half closed, and for a moment you feel something vast and gentle move through the world, not awake, not asleep, just present. The gods haven't vanished. They're dreaming still, through oceans and forests, through you and me, through every quiet heartbeat that keeps the world alive. And maybe, when they finally wake, they'll find the world they left behind not broken, but blooming. A dream so beautiful it let its dreamers rest.